Hi, and welcome to Understanding the Power of Long-Term Goals. My name is Jen Vondenbrink, and I will be your facilitator for this session, so welcome. And just a bit about me, I'm a corporate trainer and I work with companies all over the region, which for me is New England, the country, which is the United States, and lately all over the world. And I'm also, I have to say, a confessed goal setting geek. I love setting goals and I love the feeling when you achieve those goals. And I love to help people set goals too. So today, we're going to be talking about understanding the power of long-term goals and, the inspiration they give us as well as the direction they can give us. So let's go ahead and get started. Into this place, someday yeah, it's a play on words, but really what this is those times when we're saying, someday I'll go to Paris, someday I'll buy a boat, someday I'll live near the water. We all have these dreams, and there's nothing wrong with having these dreams, but unfortunately, someday can come too late and you miss those opportunities, or perhaps there's a chance that someday just will never come. And, this is where long-term goals come into play. They help us move past someday I'll and really move forward into what we really want. But everybody reacts differently to long-term goals. Some people get excited, like I do, and they can't wait to set goals and really get started. But others feel stressed and writing the goals and then worrying about how they're going to achieve them. Maybe you're one that doubts those long-term goals, right? You doubt you're ever going to achieve those goals. You've set goals like those before, and maybe you haven't been successful, so why would you be successful now? And finally, there's some fear about setting long-term goals, right? It's very interesting, but we set some goals, and I in my business have set large goals, and they were so big I froze when I actually tried to figure out how I was going to achieve them. So goals can actually strike fear into people, and I'm sure you have your own reasons and reactions to long-term goals. But the reality is that goals really require change. As we'll see, they require change in not only how you're thinking today, but how you maybe need to think tomorrow, changes in habits, and even changes in the future. So I love this model. I use this model quite frequently, but it's a great illustration of what happens when we go through a change. And as you'll notice, there's this big curve here, and everybody, no matter what the change is, starts off pretty excited about whatever the change is going to be. But very soon afterwards, they realize how big it is. And I hear from people, this is where they lose motivation in their long-term goals because, it gets hard. And we get to this juncture place, which you'll see down in the bottom of the curve where it says, who am I? And this is where our old habits meet our new habits. Because anytime we take on a long-term goal, there are going to be habits that have to change. And we need to recognize those. If we can recognize them sooner rather than later, this phase is going to go a lot smoother. But if we don't and we just look at that end goal, this is where things get hard. And this is where people give up on their goals. There's another phenomenon I wanted to share with you, and that's called the uh-oh effects. And the uh-oh effect basically came from Daniel Pink's book, When, and he talks about this as when we get halfway to our goal, that's usually where things kick in, and we realize we have to get the work done in order to be able to meet the goal. And this happens universally, and it doesn't always happen with just long-term goals. It could be short-term goals. If you have something due by the end of the day, many times you're working on it right before the day ends rather than maybe first thing in the morning, or it's due at the end of the week and you're working on it on Thursday night rather than maybe on Monday. And part of the reason that this happens is when we have a time frame to work with, other competing priorities get in the way, right? And whatever we need to work on is put on a lower priority. But when we get to that halfway point, what happens is our brains start to prioritize differently because our brains prioritize very well in constrained environments. So when we realize there's a constraint, we then amp up the priorities, and whatever it is we're working on gets a higher priority and therefore gets our attention. So with long-term goals, what this can mean is not a lot of action in the beginning of the goal and then a lot of action toward the end, which doesn't always make these goals successful, right? If you're training for a marathon, you can't train just in the last month. You have to be training all along. And so we really want to think about what can we do to mitigate the uh-oh effect, perhaps take action a little bit earlier so that we can actually glide into success at the end of our goal. Now, our goals also provide us this map, this GPS of where we're going. And that's so important because I always say that everybody has goals. Even if you don't say them out loud, everyone has goals. A baby has a goal to walk, and they will keep trying and trying and trying to walk until they do. Now, they're not telling you, oh, mom, by the way, I want to walk by summer, right? They're just working toward that goal. And we all have those that we're working towards. Whether or not we call them goals, we have them. And those are what really give us the direction and the passion in our lives. But once again, when we're thinking about these long-term goals, we may need to think about them a little differently. I love that there's a TED Talk done by Ari Walish, and he really talks about how we can think differently about long-term goals, not just looking at that end date, right? So if I want to run the marathon and I know what the date is of the marathon, not working to that, but working beyond that. And that's where he's talking about the transgenerational thinking. It's really thinking beyond your lifetime. What role model are you to your children when you're training for a marathon? How does that impact them as they grow up? And he also talks about thinking in futures instead of a future, right? So instead of thinking just, oh, I'm going to get to the marathon and I'll be done, but thinking about the multiple impacts of your goal, right? How does this impact all aspects of your life? And how will it impact all aspects of your life moving forward? And that leads to the third piece, to the what, to what end. And there he really talks about what happens after the goal. What happens after you run the marathon? How are you changed? What happens there? So in order to avoid short-termism, which is a phrase that Ari talks about, we really want to treat the future as a verb, not a noun. Very impactful TED Talk, and I will share the link to that talk for you. The other thing that we need to consider when we're looking at the power of long-term goals is when we get to those difficult places, we need an internal compelling purpose to be able to maintain our momentum as we're going through those different habit changes, etc. And one of the best places to start is this book by Simon Sinek, Start with the Why. And what Simon basically says is when we understand our why, we are much more likely to be compelled to be able to finish the goal, lead better, etc. Because we'll figure out the what we need to do or how we need to do it. But if we don't have the why behind it, those become very empty actions, right? So if I'm looking at that marathon, I know what I need to do to train. I know how I'm going to train, but why am I doing it? What is driving me, right? And that goes back to a little bit about what Ari was talking about. What's driving me in order to actually do and complete this marathon? By tapping into that, by understanding that, by calling that out, this is going to be a big reason that you're going to be able to stay motivated and perhaps avoid that uh-oh effect. So what can you do next? Well, first, you can take a little time and start to dream. Think about your lifetime goals, those someday isles you want to visit, and capture them, write them down so that you have them. The next thing is select one of your long-term goals and think about what is my why behind that. If I really choose to go for this, how is this going to impact my family? How is this going to impact my business? How is this going to impact the future generations that I may be able to influence today? But really think about that, kind of what is your motivation behind that. So diving into your why. And from there, you can start to build your plan. Many times when we set those long-term goals, we jump right into the planning and we miss this crucial middle part. And by taking some time to be able to understand our whys, etc., it's going to allow you to be much more successful. Now, a couple of questions have come up in doing this webinar, and I want to share those with you. The first question is, what can you do to stay motivated as you're going through your goals? Well, we just talked about the whys. That's a great way to be able to stay motivated. The other thing is taking things in small steps. When you take things in small steps, you'll recognize some achievement, and each one of those achievements builds on one another, and you start to build this momentum of success and achievement. So those are two strategies you can try. The second question I have is, how do you know if your goal is realistic? And this is a great question because too many of us set goals that aren't realistic. So my recommendation is once you have a very specific goal that you can measure in a certain time frame, what I want you to do is put it up against your calendar. See if it fits. If you're planning on training for that marathon and you've dedicated, many hours during the week to running and it's just not realistic based on your calendar, you're going to have to readjust. And if you readjust now, it's going to make it a whole lot easier in the future. Finally, when you have to build new habits, right, but you have other obligations, how do you make these a priority? Again, a fabulous question. And once again, this is what can lead us to the uh-oh effect. So my recommendation ties a little bit into both answers. Number one, recognizing your why, recognizing your own motivation will help boost the priority of your goal. The second thing with those small actions, build in tiny actions that you can take that don't take up a lot of time or don't really get in the way. And by doing this, you're going to ensure that you're making those small steps that you need to actually reach your goal. One of the quotes that I wrote in one of my blogs recently was, we never reach a goal in one step. It takes 1,000 steps to actually get there. So if you're worried about competing priorities or, really being pulled in multiple directions, keeping those steps small will make a big difference. So, just to wrap up, this is a preview of my 2022 goal setting course. This is actually a portion of the course. It goes in a lot deeper into the course where you get some activities to do, etc. So with that, you also get a workbook, 12 weeks of support where every Friday I reach out to you. I find out how your goals are going. We, through email, discuss what you might be able to do. We celebrate successes, etc. And this year, I'm actually adding in some additional ways we can do check-ins and some educational opportunities throughout the year. So registration for this opens on December 1st, but you don't have to go for that because you can set your own goals. But if you want that additional support, I have all the support that you need in the goal setting course. So to wrap things up for today, the power of long-term goals is really within your grasp. All you need to do is start to look and understand at what those goals are, spell them out, understand your whys, understand what habits are going to have to change, start to build those plans, and then start to take action. What I'm including with this webinar is an action planning sheet that will help you walk through some of these initial steps. So I hope that's been helpful. I look forward to hearing how you're doing, and everyone take care. Thank you so much for being here.